We'll find the guests that you want me to speak to, and we'll continue to do what we do. Thank you so much. Vanessa Van Edwards. For someone that's just clicked on this conversation now, and they're wondering why they should stay and listen to what we're going to talk about, what would you say to them?
Very highly successful people speak a hidden language, and that is the language of cues. If you don't know how to read the cues people are sending to you, if you don't know how to control the cues you're sending to others, you are missing a crucial element of success.
How do you quantify that in a way that I know that it's true? Are there studies or stats that reinforce what you've just said?
82% of our impressions of people are based on warmth and competence. That means that if we can control our warmth cues and our competence cues, we know we are taking care of 82% of our impression. And that is critical to being more memorable, to being more confident, to having clearer communication.
And taking that a bit further, what areas of my life will that impact? So if I'm warm and I'm competent, which are going to be the things that I can control, what are the downstream consequences of that?
So I think my mission is to tackle a big lie, and that is that smart people will translate their book smarts into people smarts. But actually, no matter how smart you are, if you do not know how to communicate with people, you can't connect with people, you can't have good relationships, you can't have supportive friendships, you get looped into difficult people or toxic people, you have trouble getting raises or promotions. When you are able to control your communication, it helps you not be overlooked, not be misunderstood, and that affects your friendships, your partner, your career, and it also helps you feel more confident walking into a room.
And what is your research based on? Are you a researcher? Have you done sort of first-party research yourself? Where were you drawing from?
So I'm a recovering awkward person. So I used to believe that you were either born with charisma or you weren't, that charisma was genetic. And in 2002, I discovered a study that changed my life, which said that charisma can be learned. This is when I started to tackle to figure out, okay, if charisma can be learned, how do we learn it? How can we learn blueprints for conversation? How can we learn frameworks for how we connect and how we socialize? That's when I started doing my own research. So I'm a behavioral researcher and a best-selling author on communication, and I specialize in helping very brilliant, very smart, awkward folks not be overlooked.
And give me some sort of depth as to the amount of research and the quantity of research that you've done, how many people you've studied, how many hours of footage, etc.
Yep, so I developed my first framework about 12 years ago, and we've helped 400,000 students learn that framework, master it, and conquer awkwardness or feel more confident. Some of those folks had very professional goals, like getting raised or promotion. Other folks were so socially anxious and so awkward they couldn't make friends. Other people were looking for their soulmate or their partner. And so 400,000 students have told me that this framework works.
Nobody teaches us this stuff today.
Or actually, extroverts tend to teach it. So I read the quintessential How to Win Friends and Influence People back in the day. And that's a wonderful book, but it's a book written by an extrovert. If you are not naturally extroverted, I am not naturally extroverted, I'm more ambiverted. It is very hard to learn how to communicate if you don't naturally gravitate towards people. I was like, there has to be a way to teach introverts and ambiverts to be able to feel confident without having to fake it till you make it, without having to pretend to be extroverted or outgoing to be taken seriously or to be charismatic.
What's an ambivert?
So ambiverts get energy from the right people in the right places. So for example, in this interview, I love one-on-one conversations. I feel myself. But if we were to go to a loud bar or a nightclub, I would completely shut down and want to be alone. Ambiverts can dial up extroversion to hit their goals. So if they know they have to be friendly and meet people for an interview or a position, they can do it. But they need lots of recharge time. The reason why it's important to know if you're an ambivert is because you should know what are the people and places that drain you. There are certain people, when you open your calendar and you look at it and you're like, oh, I have to be with that person. That is someone that drains you. They do not bring out your extroversion or your natural love of people. There are also certain people who you feel you can talk to for hours. They give you social energy. They charge your social battery. So the very first thing I have students do is sit and make a list. Who are the people who give you energy, who charge you up? Who are the people who take from you? Those are people that we want to put boundaries around, we want to say no to, we want to limit as much as possible. And then also the places. Where do you thrive? Is it conferences, one-on-one business, or is it friends, socializing, parties? Knowing those places helps you optimize your social battery.
And when you say cues, which you said at the start of this conversation, people think of just body language. Is that the sort of full extent of areas that you focus on?
Yes, so cues come into 4 different channels. There is body language, that's facial expressions, gestures, posture. But there's also vocal. So vocal cues are the tone of our voice, our pace, our volume, our cadence. There's also the words we use, obviously verbal cues. The types of words that I'm choosing to use are signaling my warmth and competence to you. And the smallest channel is our ornaments. The colors we wear, the jewelry we wear, the way we wear our hair, the way we wear your facial hair. Those are also signaling different things or cueing people to feel a certain way about you.
And what about what we say? Because I know you're writing a book about it. I don't know if I can leak this.
You can.
Here we go.
Yeah, you can.
You're writing a book about conversation, so what we say.
So I did not realize how powerful our words are. And here's a study that really changed the way I think about this. Very simple study. They brought people into the lab and they split them up into 2 different groups. In one group, they said, today you're gonna play the community game. And they played kind of a prisoner's dilemma type of game. The second group, they came into the same room, the same research, and they said, good morning. Today you're gonna play the Wall Street game. The trick was, the games were exactly the same. There was no difference between the 2 games. What they found was everyone who was told they were playing the Wall Street game shared an average of 1/3 of their profits. Everyone who was told they were playing the community game shared an average of 2/3 of their profits. This means that one word, community game, community, made people think and feel more about community. It made them act more collaboratively. This means that the words we're using in our emails, our subjects, our texts, our LinkedIn profile headlines are cueing people for how they should treat us. One really simple way to think about this is your calendar. I send out calendar invites multiple times a week to clients, to friends. When we have meeting, one-on-one, call, video, interview, I'm being cued for nothing. Those words are so overused, they're sterile. If you add cues that prime people to feel or think a certain way, you're actually setting them up for success. So 2025 wins, collaborative session, strategy meeting, goal overview, teamwork collab session. those words are actually cueing that person's brain every single time they open their calendar, that when we read a word like collaborate, we are literally more likely to be collaborative. So the words that we use, even one single word, can actually change the way people think.
It's funny because our entire lives are people. Like the difference between me being a president, prime minister, superb salesperson, exceptional entrepreneur is probably just my understanding of other people and how I show up in my words and my cues. And so when you think about it like that, this could be, for many people, the most important subject for them to improve upon.
Cross country.
I would even go further and say, if you don't have people skills, you cannot succeed. You cannot succeed in life, you cannot succeed in love, you cannot succeed in business. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you need people to have success. So this is, I think, the most fundamental skill that people can invest in.
And how many people did you say you've taught people skills to?
400,000 students invest in.
And how many people did
In business. You
improve upon? Any words in my cues? And so when you think about it like that, this could be, for many people, the most important subject for them to improve upon.
I would even go further and say, if you don't have people skills, you cannot succeed. You cannot succeed in life, you cannot succeed in love, you cannot succeed in business. It doesn't matter how smart you are, you need people to have success. So this is, I think, the most fundamental skill that people can invest in.
And how many people did you say you've taught people skills to?
400,000 students.
And is there a particular case study that stands out to you as being the most extreme in terms of case studying the fact that someone can go from 0 to... a wonderful place?
Yes, and it's my very brilliant but stoic students. So I've noticed, especially over the last 10 years, I've been doing this for about 17 years. In the last 10 years especially, my most extreme students are the students who are very, very smart, very talented and good at what they do, but they don't know what cues to send, and so they completely shut down. They try to become stoic, unreadable, they try to have no facial expressions, they literally try to poker face all the time. And as they try to make connections, meet a partner, make friends, people don't like them, people don't trust them, they can't get buy into their ideas. And those are the students where I see the biggest transformation. They don't realize that muting your cues is a danger zone cue. If you try to be stoic and unreadable, people literally cannot get a read on you. And so my biggest transformations have happened when I can say, you don't need to hide your true feelings. It's about amplifying them with the right cues. There's a famous example of this, Jamie Siminoff, founder of Ring. So I don't know if you ever watched Shark Tank.
Yeah.
So in this episode, for those who haven't seen it, Jamie Siminoff entered the tank and he pitched $1 billion idea. Literally $1 billion idea, because it went on to raise funding from Shaq and Richard Branson. But in the tank, he pitches the idea and he gets so much pushback and so much negotiation, and he walks out of the tank without a deal. In fact, the Sharks did not like him. What happened? He had the $1 billion idea, but he did not know how to share it. This is the biggest transformation I see, is people who have brilliant ideas. They're good people, they're hardworking people, and they cannot get buy-in. They cannot make friends, they cannot find partners.
How do they feel? So if you had to say words that make them feel seen right now, how are they feeling as they're listening to this?
Overwhelmed, getting into interaction, just social overthinking, not knowing what to do, not knowing what to feel. Underestimated, like people don't see you or the real potential that you have. A lack of confidence and fear. Afraid that if you are your true self, or you try any of the things we're talking about, people won't like you. And I want to teach you that you can be yourself and you can be liked and you can find your people. And that doesn't mean everyone's gonna like you, but it means if you signal the right things, cues tell others how to treat you. If you signal the right cues, you will find your people.
One of the things that I was sort of inferring from what you said is the importance of understanding your resting bitch face. That's like the term we use in the UK, resting bitch face, which is like when you're just listening or doing nothing. Like, how does your face look?
Yes.
And you're telling me that's really, really important.
It's real. So I call it resting bothered face. Because
Okay,
I
I
have to be
probably
a
shouldn't use that word.
resting bothered face. RBF, same thing. Okay, this is a real phenomenon, which is that all of us have different faces at rest. Now I want you to look at my face for a second. My face at rest, I'm gonna rest it for a second. My mouth angles down in sort of an upside down U, so it looks like this. You see how these are going down?
Yeah.
Are you laughing at my U?
A little bit.
Okay. So at rest, I look a little sad.
Yeah.
That is just my mouth at rest. Yours goes pretty straight across.
I just.
You have a lot of hood. That's what that's
have
called.
a lot of
hood.
Yes.
This is hood. Yes. Yes. So that probably makes you. Do people think you're angry or tired?
Both.
Both. Okay. People never call me angry. They call me sad. You need to look in the mirror and figure out what is the default of your face. If your mouth angles down into a frown, people are going to think you're sad. You're going to have to be counteracting that with your cues. If you have a lot of hood above your eyes, or you have these two vertical lines that appear between your eyebrows, you actually don't have them, but if some people at rest even have those two lines, people are going to think you're angry or frustrated. If you have down eyes, so I don't know if you noticed, but I've added cat makeup to my eye.
Ah, yes.
Yes, that actually makes me look less sad, because also my eyes slope a little bit down at the end, which makes me look sad. So people often are like, "Are you okay? Are you tired?" I'm like, "No, that's just my face." So I have ways that I counteract it. One, I get to use makeup, which is a great thing. But second, I know that I need to make my face a little bit more up, right? So when I am interacting with someone, when I'm on video, when I'm interview, I typically rest my face in an upward position. I've activated these muscles, so don't I look happier?
You do, but have you got to consciously tell yourself to do
Yes.
that, or do you just always remember?
No, I have to consciously tell myself to do that. Now, I only need to do that with people with a first impression, or when I'm trying to make a good impression. My team knows that I'm not sad, right? Like my team, they see me all the time, they see me without makeup, they know that I'm not sad, they know that's just my face. So here's what's critical. One, you should know what is your resting default. Are you looking sad, angry, or afraid? Oh, afraid I didn't do. So if you have, you actually have some.
Oh, you joking?
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. You have these
Just had
lines.
someone laughing. One of my team just laughing back.
So you have them just right here, these light lines here. So when we're afraid, we go, we raise our eyebrows up, and you can't see it because I have Botox in my forehead, but yeah, there you go, that's great. Now, no, open your eyes and go, that's afraid. So the more you have those lines and the whites of your eyes appear, like have you ever seen someone kind of walk around like a deer in the headlights?
Yeah.
They make you feel anxious. Like if I were to do my entire interview a little bit wide-eyed, you would not only feel anxious, but you wouldn't believe what I was saying. So you all should see if you have this default lines or if the whites of your eyes show. Look at your profile pictures. In your profile pictures, here are the 3 biggest mistakes people make. 1, they're showing fear eyes. So people, you are signaling, accidentally, anxiety. So try to make sure you're not showing the upper whites. Second mistake people do is they make a contempt micro-expression. So that's a one-sided mouth raise. So just do a one-sided mouth raise for me. Does it make you kind of feel like, better?
Yeah.
Don't do it for too long.
Yeah.
So if you do it at home, there's a facial feedback hypothesis. When you make these faces, it actually triggers the emotion. Just like when you have the emotion, it triggers the face. There's a loop that happens. So if people make the contempt expression, one-sided mouth raise, not only do they look scornful and a disdain, they actually begin to feel better than and scornful. So do not do an asymmetrical smile in your profile picture. You are accidentally signaling negativity. The third biggest mistake people make is you do an inauthentic smile in their picture. The only true indicator of happiness is when these cheek muscles are activated. Anyone can fake smile. This is what mine looks like. But you've seen people do it, right?
Yeah, I do it.
Yeah, and people know.
Yeah,
I would rather
yeah.
you not.
No, because I just don't have a good smile.
What?
Look, like what am I
Am
gonna?
I going to say, no, it's horrible?
Do you know I don't
That's
have a good
not your real
smile.
smile.
So I literally have to do this when I take photos. 'Cause that's my smile. I
that's
can't
not
do
a
the
real
teeth
smile.
thing. I try to. What am I gonna do?
Well, you can smile without your teeth as long as it hits your upper cheek muscle. So just try this for me. Put your pen or your finger in between your mouth like this and smile as hard as you can go. Oh, that's better. That reaches all the way up into your eyes. Do you see?
Oh, that's not.
That looks so much better.
Okay.
If you can activate these muscles in your profile picture, you don't have to walk around like that, but if you can activate, not the fear, just here, just here.
Okay.
If you can activate these muscles in your profile picture, it shows authentic happiness, or don't smile at all. I hate the advice. Just smile more. Fake smiles do not work. Dr. Barbara Wild studied this. She took pictures of people thinking of something they were authentically happy about, took a picture of them smiling.
okay? We got everybody here who's coming, I guess. But I see somebody who isn't here. How do you like that? Now, that's an old philosophical question, isn't it? That's right. Whether you can see somebody that isn't here. I remember arguing in Princeton with the graduate students for hours and hours, the philosophy students, as to whether what you were talking about when you said there was no chicken in the icebox. Yeah, well, it's philosophy. So much fun. That's why, yeah, I have nothing to do with philosophers. We thought that it was possible that there's still people who don't appreciate the difficulty of this thing with the boxes. So I'd like to divide you into groups. Those who are perfectly confident about it and don't want me to go over it 16 more times. And those who would like me to go over it, well, at least 2 more times. So can we divide this thing up? I would like to know how many want me to go over it a couple more times so they really fully feel the difficulty. All right, we have 2-3 customers, something like that. So what we'll do is that Ralph, who's an expert on the system, will take care of you. In the meantime, the guys who've been asking me very technical questions about perturbation theory, calculations, and other matters of this kind will have a chance to talk to me. Because we have such a difference in backgrounds of people, we're going to separate temporarily. So the ones who are having trouble before will have caught it, will catch up and see why it's interesting, because that's the whole purpose of this, is to understand that. If you don't understand that, we're not going to understand anything else. I mean, there's no problems. So that's the essential thing. After that, it's very easy. It's going to be easier. It's just like climbing a mountain, and from then it's to get a view. You see the view, and now you climb around down on the ground and have fun. So that's what it is. But we have to get you up to the mountain, right? So Ralph will help you climb to the top of the mountain. In the meantime, these guys who think they're there already will waste time by answering the technical things and complicated things, so which the others will be interested in anyway. All right? So can we do it that way? So he's over there. All right, how about that? So those who are having, you're not going to miss anything. Wait a second. This is just going to be some yeah, so we'll just take care of that. And the other ones will be, we'll talk about other things, please. Then I'll come back when they're all back, all on the mountain. Then we'll go back to the top of the mountain and show what the views are from there on, okay? So the present questions would perhaps be best if they're not directly attached to this question of the 2/3. We'll delay those until our friends come back from the mountain, okay? No Brownian motion. That discourse is fun. You mean, what do you want me to do about it? You know about it?
About it. And I was thinking, in terms of what you said yesterday about, the reason it came up to mind was you said, well, the atom doesn't have to act like we have to.
Yeah.
Time aside was a different scale. Then I was thinking, well, where would randomness be in the cell? I was thinking
Living cells, you mean?
Yeah,
right.
Biological process.
Right. Right.
Formulated the question of that by saying,
yes, there's a kind of randomness, which is, but that randomness is not involved in quantum mechanical randomness, you're quite aware, and it's due to the complexity of things, that there's so much stuff, and all the atoms are bouncing against each other in a kind of chaotic manner, so that, for example, liquid like water, the molecules are, we can take a normal view of molecules as little balls, shapes, different kinds, and the same kind actually, water molecule, and that they're piled together and jiggling all the time next to each other, and this perpetual jiggling is molecular motion. Brownian motion is observable. So it's possible to see this jiggling if you put a small particle, very fine particle, dirt. As a matter of fact, I did toothpaste. It's rather nice with toothpaste. If you haven't got a very powerful good microscope, it's easy to see. If you put something like toothpaste or something that's a little powder, then the very fine particles jiggling about under the microscope perpetually. In the case of the toothpaste, they are flat. The one that I happen to have is very good because there was some kind of flat little crystal. And my microscope wasn't even big enough to see them. But because they would turn and the light would come just right and reflect. These little flashes all over, so it's kind of... But it's easy with a good microscope. And it's very much like... I haven't seen this for years. There used to be some kind of tremendous push balls that they had. Enormous balls. Great big. They put it on a field. People trying to push it to some direction. The other team's trying to push it the other way. And the whole ball moves. And there's this crowd of people all pushing one way or the other. The ball just jiggles. And if you look at it from a distance, you can imagine it was so far away you couldn't see the individual people, but could still make out the little ball. And you see this little ball jiggling, from which you can infer people jiggling. So in the same way, what you're looking at is a very large mass of atoms. You look at a particle that you can see, because a particle you can see even in the microscope is a billion atoms or so, a great big thing. But it doesn't stay put, because it's being bombarded all this time by the little atoms, and it therefore jiggles a little bit, and that's called Brownian motion. It was discovered by Robert Brown, a biologist, that when he looked at the microscope, he saw this jiggling motion. And being a biologist, he would think that he would decide that this motion that he saw must be a form of life. A good biologist that made the necessary experiments, ultimately discovered that the motion even existed in the water that was enclosed in a quartz crystal that you could get from the ground that had been there for millions and millions of years. And he looked in, it was still jiggling inside there, so he concluded that couldn't be life. That was a universal phenomenon of nature. It is that we look very calm, we look at things as they're permanent and stationary. But as a matter of fact, of course, they're made out of piles of atoms which are always jiggling. Our eyes can't see the delicate jiggling. That is a way that you can make an energy. You can amplify such jiggling. The electrons and wires jiggle too. Everything jiggles. Yes, that's right. And so they make electrical voltages which fluctuate. If you have a good amplifier, you get a rushing noise all the time. It's easy to measure, and so on. As a matter of fact, the first determinations of the sizes of atoms was made by measuring how much jiggling there was, because you can imagine, you can see that how much this thing wiggles depends upon how big the molecules are and so on, how many there are. So of course, in the beginning, when there was a theory of atoms, there was a lot of evidence for it, but there was no way of measuring or estimating how big they were at first. The first estimate was made, I think, by the intensity of the blue of the sky, which is curious, but the more accurate is the one on the jiggling. Einstein made a lot of mathematics of the theory of Brownian motion, this jiggling, and these equations were used to compare to experiment to determine the sizes of atoms. Since then, there are much better ways of measuring the size of that. What else can we say about the jiggling? Do you have any other points? Yes?
I mean, I don't want to get too technical.
You can now, because we've got all the untechnical people.
When I was a student, it was an experiment I was to set up for the dualismus of wave and particle. I wonder how that is today.
Cross country?
It's a two-slit part.
Yes.
If you have one slit.
Yes, I know. I want to discuss the two-slit experiment in detail later on, a few days from now.
Because
in
I
all
was actually
detail.
setting up the counters.
Cross country.
Okay.
And I was.
Yeah, well, we're going to describe that very experiment, and therefore, if you don't mind, every one of your questions, I always seem to put off. But let's say it this way, they're very relevant to what we're talking about, and I had planned to talk about them. I'm not going to leave you off at the end. I'm not cheating you. Yes?
Okay, so my question yesterday was in
Yes.
regard to the... it's not clear to me why
Yes.
Feynman diagrams should actually manifest when we look for them. Because you know, the actual exact solution is an infinite sum that we can't do of all
Right,
the terms.
right.
In theory, so why in nature do we find the terms?
Because we're finding the answer to something. Let me show you something, okay? Suppose that the right answer to a mathematical problem is 1 divided by 1 minus 1/100.
Winning a cause.
And suppose I don't know how to divide, because it's very difficult. This is imaginary. This is analogy. The analogy is that I have very complicated equations I can't solve directly. But there are certain other operations that I know how to do more or less easily. So, yes, now we could say that this would be equal to 1 plus 0.01 plus 0.01 times 0.01 plus 0.01 times 0.01 times 0.01, which we write as the 3 times, you know, that's the cube, and so on. Now the fact that, and so on, forever. It's never correct if I stop anywhere. But if I keep on going, let's say it goes 01 times 01 times 01 times 01 4 times. Or you know what this cube means, I presume. 4 times, and then it goes 5 times, and so forth, okay? Now, if I wanted to see whether my theory agreed with experiment, so I measured something that the theory says is this big, all right? But I can't really calculate that because I don't know how to divide. You understand it's an analogy. Of course I know how to divide. But I do know how to multiply and add. And so I would measure this. Let's say I measure this and I'd find out the result was 10103 or something, whatever. I want to know if it agrees with experiment. I mean, the theory, let's say it like here. That many places. That's not a decimal point. That means I got it that accurate. And these are significant. I measure it again and again, and it always agrees with that. Now we want to find out if it's correct. Then we could do it this way. We'd say, well, if it was a sloppy measurement, the answer's 1. That means I dropped all this stuff. But I could do better by adding another piece, which is the first piece. But the next piece turns out, if you multiply it out, double 1. And the next one, if you work it out, no matter what, 4 zeros, 6 zeros, 5 zeros, and 1, and so on. Now maybe, to make the analogy better, it gets harder and harder to calculate the... it's hard for me to multiply. It takes a lot of work. Here I have to do more multiplying and more multiplying, okay? So I can only do a few of these terms. Nevertheless, you see, if I do a few of them, I get an excellent approximation to the answer. So you say, why is it valid? It's valid to leave out some terms. But really, the correct answer is the sum of all of them. The answer is that the higher terms are contributing less and less. We hope, anyway. We can't calculate exactly. We're not going to compute it exactly. We're going to stop somewhere. But by a mathematical argument, or by guessing, or by noticing how each one is going down so well, we suppose that the higher ones are smaller and smaller. So if we forget only the first 4, say, then we would get an answer that was presumably rather accurate. We could estimate that the next one is 100th times smaller than that, perhaps. Of course, all these estimatings and so on are unnecessary. We actually can carry it out in this example by analogy. You can imagine it's hard to do all the arithmetic. Then we would say the answer is 1010. Or 1 could conclude, for example, or 01, let's say it could conclude from this example that this agrees with experiment. Or if it agrees, it depends on what the experimental result is, it could be agreed. It could agree. The point is, we don't have to calculate mathematical quantity exactly. The theory is complicated. We have other mathematical rearrangements which are equivalent. That's all it is. And the perturbation theory, so-called, with the diagrams, is simply a way of calculating the successive terms of a series like that.
I'm not clear why the specific terms manifest.
Because we started with something that we know here, a formula that produces these terms. That's what the theory is.
The way I'm hearing the question
Oh.
Each one of those terms is a Feynman diagram, and he's asking why should the individual terms manifest as physical process?
They don't.
Each individual term.
All the terms are there.
Like a particular, one of those terms might be a particular kind of scattering.
No. A particular kind of scattering is the sum of all the terms. All the things are happening when there's a scattering. You've broken it up into elementary subplots to analyze it. Each diagram represents a piece of an analysis. You could say in this case, if you wanted to, you could say, this is called a schlonkus. Okay, now the theory is complicated. It says not any number of schlonkuses can occur. I can analyze it by saying either there are no schlonkuses, the contribution from no schlonkus effect is 1. The contribution from the one schlonkus effect is 0.01. 2 schlonkuses is 0.001 and so on. But in any real situation, there's an arbitrary number of schlonkuses. And they're in the formula here. Yes.
Proton, electron, neutrino.
Yes.
Simple, but there are higher terms.
That's right. That means that the formula for the decay of a neutron is a complicated expression, which is being expressed as a sequence of approximations.
I understand that the first order term
Yes,
is a Feynman diagram, and the second order is a second order term is a little more complicated. Feynman
that's
diagram.
right. That's more complicated.
Right, we look in nature and we find the first order term.
What's the second order term?
The second order what it is.
We find them all. We find them all as nearly as we can measure. If we only measured a certain number of figures, then I can't be sure that these are here. But they were invented because this is what we were trying to express. We know this side and we
You have
represent it
arrived
this
early,
way.
but the next Horizon Arcade event will
And
begin
we
shortly.
just say there are these terms.
Enjoy.
And these terms are left out because they're so small. I don't know what the problem is. Well, maybe we can talk together sometime and get it clear. Have everybody back or no? I see there's still somebody working.
Yeah, we're all back. He's just getting some.
Oh, okay. So you're all back. You mean you've all been educated? Everything okay? Oh, great. Well, that was easier. He said it would take a half an hour. But apparently you were closer to understanding it than he thought, or he was cleverer at explaining it, or else he gave up despair.
Maybe an even higher order term.
Right. Okay. Well, now that we all are together on it and see that there's something deeply puzzling about it, I review the phenomena for just a moment and say a few words about it and tell you things. The idea was we discovered this, that we can get 2 boxes, each of which has 3 buttons on it. There's 3 buttons, which we say 1 or 2 or 3, and we can push a button, and it lights a light, which is either red or green. Do you mind I change the color from red and black? The black light is a little annoying analogy. It doesn't light. It's no good. So here's the measuring light that comes out. You push, yes, you could do it many ways. You push this and the light's red or green. This is button 1, button 2, button 3. Likewise on this box. And just to review, once finally more goes like this.
Take a photo of the
Boxes
2016.
set up, and I give you charges for them, or I give you the boxes. I have, once they were together. They can be taken anywhere. Now, it goes like this. If you push any button here, the light will light up either red or green, and it's about 50-50. If you push a button here, and then push a different button on the box, then the light agrees with the other one only a quarter of the time. That is, if this one gives red, and then you push the other one, this will only give red a quarter of the time. Or it gives black, the opposite color, 3/4 of the time. You said it both ways, right? And that's very curious. If there was, well, we've explained the curiosity of it for too many times. Now the situation is here that this box has the same prop, that this box will always agree with this one. If you push a button on both of them, then the buttons will give the same color lights. This doesn't have a light yet, so therefore it won't work yet. All right, I'll put the light on it. Good. Now, if you push button 2 on both boxes, then the lights are both red or both green. They always agree with each other, no problem. And, but what's odd is that if you push a button 1 here and get red, and push button 2 here, it will be black 3/4 of the time. And after a lot of thought, much study, discovered that that's very strange. Okay. You can get 2/3 of the time without any trouble, but not 3/4. So I would now like to say what the uncertainty principle is. I said it once before, I'll just say it again to make it clear to everybody who now understands it, what Bell's theorem is, and what the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox was supposed to be. Okay, and a little bit of the history. The first, forget the second box first, and think about this first one. If when I push this button I get red and green, then if I push this one and it agrees or disagrees, let's say 3/4 of the time, that's impossible unless, if we imagine there were cards under there or something like that that were set, and when we started out that this was going to be red if we pushed it, and if we pushed this one, let's say it was going to be green and this one green, then sometimes when we pushed a pair of buttons like this pair, we get them to match. And that would be 1/3 of the time because we could pick the buttons in every pair combination. And there are 3 out of all of the 6 different ways of choosing, 3 different ways of choosing pairs. One of them match. That one would give a match, that would give a not match, and that would give a not match. So if I pick 2 buttons at random, I'd expect they'd match 1/3 of the time, but actually they only match 1/4 of the time. The easy example would be if they didn't match at all. Then you would have to say, so in either case, that something happens, that when you push this button, if they were red, green, green, it was a set that they would have made if I had pushed them. Then when I push this one, I must change it somehow because the experimental result is 1/4 of the time. So when I push this, the only way to explain that is to have a machine that if I push one button, it changes the ones underneath. Now, if we go to nature and look at it and say, well, what happens if I looked at all the buttons at the same time, that I pushed this and got the result, and pushed that and found all the results will always repeat. For example, nothing would ever change, then I'd be in a pickle. So, but it is true that we're only allowed to push one button at a time, and furthermore, it does turn out that when we push a button, let's say this one and gets red, then this one is green, say, and we push this one again, it's no longer red. So we have experimentally noticed that it is true. It's quite possible and perfectly true that we could imagine it this way, that when we push the buttons, they change the colors of the other lights. I remind you, if you push the same button again and again, it always checks out the same color. I start out and make sure this is red by pushing it 8 times. Then I push this one, it's green, it'll stay green all the time, say. Then if I push this, it's possible that it be green now. Okay? Otherwise, I'd never be able to explain this 1/3. Yes, yes. If you push the same button, it never changes the result if you push it again. You push the same button again. Yeah, yes, in a particular circuit. Obviously, this is set up for particular measurements. Yes, it can be made so that it doesn't, in general, doesn't change, and you can push it as much as you want. There are situations where things change. There are situations where they don't. Yes, you can push it as many times as you want in succession, and nothing about that one changes. We don't know what's happening in the other one because we can't see. When you push another one, then you see it's changed. So you could still imagine that there was sort of potential cards underneath there or some kind of thing that determines what color is going to be. But now we have a new rule that when we push it, it changes what's under the other buttons. And furthermore, we can't assume that it doesn't change. If we assume it doesn't change, we're going to get in trouble with the 1/4 result. So therefore, we would have to say that if this theory, well, experimentally is right, the theory is right, but in the early days when it was first discovered, all the experiments weren't done yet. But when the theory came out that would predict results like this, it was obvious that it was necessary for such results, that if there were such a thing as the potential lights that were going to light, and the potential cards under there, that by pushing buttons, you're changing the results that you would get for the other button. And experimentally, it does turn out, just like we said, it's all right, it's okay. If you push this and get red, then you push this and get green. It is possible when you push that to find its change. In fact, it's necessary that you find a change, because if we keep on thinking about this, we would get 2/3 of the For 2/3 of the time, they would be different. They would change, and in 1/3 they would be the same. But it's rather 3/4 than 1/4, so we have to have a change, and God, thank God, it does change. But that's a very simple view then. There's nothing wrong with that. We say that there were these things were under here, but they changed. Now to say there were things under here, that is, ahead of time, there's potentiality to be red or green without looking at it yet. We can talk about such an idea. We're going to call a classical view. That means an old-fashioned view. And what Heisenberg said was that the old-fashioned view, if it's tried to be maintained at all, would have to have in it an additional new feature that it shall be impossible to determine what color this one would be without changing the potential color that the other one would be. In other words, by measuring that, by pushing that button number 2, you've got to change the colors under number 1 or 3 if you wanted to picture the color. And we see why we have to do that. Otherwise, we would get 1/3 and we wouldn't get the result today of experiment and at that time of theory. Historically, however, Heisenberg's statement wasn't measured with this particular box business, and he didn't have this nicely, which took 40 years of patient thinking to get the simplest possible example. He had a more complicated example, which was measuring something called a position of a particle, which is an idea that anybody classically would think. A little ball or an electron or a particle would have some kind of position, and you could measure what it was. It would be a number. It would tell you how far it is from the east wall. But 3 numbers if you want, plus that wall, plus that wall. But let's talk about motion just this way. There'd be a number which would tell how far a particle was from a wall. There was another thing one could measure in classical physics, which was something like the speed. Actually, it's called the momentum. It's the speed times the mass. It's a thing that tells you how well it
should be able to use. Use any car for this, so drop it in the comments what you decide to choose. The location you gotta go to is the Horizon Festival drag strip. That's what shows in the photo. I don't think the other drag strips will work, but you can let me know if I'm wrong on that. And all you're gonna have to do is simply beep your horn 3 times. So just roll out of the original Festival Mexico, roll up to the drag strip start gates, and this time we don't gotta full send it, we just gotta beep our horn 3 times, and once you do that, Treasure Challenge Complete will pop up, and of course we get the orange circle on our map, and as always, your boys got you. Show you the treasure test location, and of course drive you right into smashing it. Don't forget to drop a like to support the video. Of course subscribe if you're new. But ladies and gentlemen, a very quick winter treasure hunt. 3, 2, 1. I'm out of here. I'll see you on the next video for the photo challenge, and I'll be live streaming to do some racing for the winter playlist as well. And that's all I got. I will see you on the next one.
Wait, what?
That time again, boys. Welcome back to the channel. It's Stevie-O, and the first thing you gotta know for the winter treasure hunt. 3, 2, 1. The car in the photo, the car that I used, is the 1957 Chevy Bel Air. I once again think that you should be able to use any car for this, so drop it in the comments what you decide to choose. The location you gotta go to is the Horizon Festival drag strip. That's what shows in the photo. I don't think the other drag strips will work, but you can let me know if I'm wrong on that. And all you're gonna have to do is simply beep your horn 3 times. So just roll out of the original Festival Mexico, roll up to the drag strip start gates, and this time we don't gotta full send it, we just gotta beep our horn 3 times, and once you do that, treasure challenge complete will pop up. And of course, we get the orange circle on our map. And as always, your boys got you. Show you the treasure chest location, and of course, drive you right into smashing it. Don't forget to drop a like to support the video. Of course, subscribe if you're new. Ladies and gentlemen, a very quick winter treasure hunt. 3, 2, 1. I'm out of here. I'll see you on the next video for the photo challenge. And I'll be live streaming to do some racing for the winter playlist as well. And that's all I got. I will drop a like to support the video. Of course, subscribe if you're new. Ladies and gentlemen, a very quick winter treasure hunt. 3, 2, 1. I'm out of here. I'll see you on the next video for the photo challenge. And I'll be live streaming to do some racing for the winter playlist as well. And that's all I got. I will see you on the next one.
Forza Horizon 5 released back in November of 2021, and over the past 3 years, the developers have introduced a ton of free and paid content to the game. New cars, new map expansions, new features, and so on, for us to go explore, drive around, and basically just have some fun with. Unfortunately though, as of last week and the introduction of the 1995 Ford Mustang, that marks the end of new content for FH5. Or well, at least we think it's the end of new content for FH5. In case you missed it, when the most recent update of FH5 was announced, the developers made this whole big deal about how they're retiring the festival playlist and they're not going to have new festival playlists, and they're kind of done with all of that. And all the festival playlists from this point on are just going to be reusing the old ones from the game. Except fast forward like 2 days later, and the developers are already hyping up a future update called Racing Realms, Horizon Realms. That's going to be the first big content update that goes on Xbox, PC, and the PS5. However, for the purposes of this video, can we just kind of ignore that update and pretend it doesn't exist, or at least pretend it doesn't include anything new? This is probably going to age really poorly in a couple of months, but that's fine. It's all good. Now that we've got that under control, I can start this video the way I wanted to. Now that all of the new content for Forza Horizon 5 has officially been introduced, I wanted to look back on the past 3 years of content and share my honest review and my honest thoughts of Forza Horizon 5. Ever since Forza Horizon 5 was introduced back in 2021, it's been a controversial game from the perspective of its players, the reviews, and so on and so forth. And today, I wanted to share some of my thoughts and, at the same time, hear what you guys have to say about Forza Horizon 5 now that we've had this game for this long. So in today's video, I'm going to talk about the good of Forza Horizon 5, the not so good, and the bad. The really, really bad. I think we can all agree one of Forza Horizon 5's strongest points has got to be the car list. When the game introduced back in 2021, it launched with over 500 cars into the game, and over the past 3 years, the developers have introduced another 400 plus cars into the game, bringing the total to over 900 today. Truly, there is a car for everybody in this game, whether it be the latest and greatest supercar, hypercar, dedicated, proper built-up drag racing cars, old school muscle cars, JDM stuff, Euro stuff, Australian stuff, or even the weird and the wacky stuff. There is something for everyone. I know saying that is probably going to trigger some people because people always want more and the internet's never satisfied, but straight up, Forza Horizon 5 has one, if not the strongest car list for a racing game probably ever. Building off of that point though, I've also been a big fan of the customization in Forza Horizon 5. Obviously, we're lacking a little bit in the options and maybe depth department as compared to like a Need for Speed or a True Motorfest in terms of the visual customization stuff. But I think when you take into account all of the performance stuff you can do, like engine swaps and drivetrain swaps, messing around with weight reduction and roll cages, and then throw in the body kits and all of the third-party manufacturers into that, I think you got a pretty good customization section in Forza Horizon. I also think the physics of the cars in Forza Horizon 5 are pretty bang on for a simcade racing game in 2025. I know they're not perfect, and I know some small subsections of the community, like the tryhard boys, for example, will definitely be able to nitpick inconsistencies here and there, but let's be honest, that's the case for every tryhard community, for every game, ever made. So I'm not gonna lie, we've been pretty safe in the things that I've spoke about so far. I think we should start jumping into some of the more controversial things on my list and start poking the bear a little bit. I think personally, Forza Horizon 5 offers an incredible amount of different things to go and do in the game. I think people sometimes forget that Forza Horizon, at the end of the day, is an open world sandbox racing game, and the whole point of it is so you can do what you want, when you want, with whatever car or vehicle you want to do it. In FH5, there is no set path, there is no set goal, there is no larger, overreaching objective. It's all designed for you to do what you want, to earn credits, buy your favorite cars, go and drive them in any way that you want. And basically, at the end of the day, that means it's up to you to create your own fun in FH5, and you can do that any way you want. And I think at the end of the day, some people are better at that than others, which is why sometimes you see people online saying FH5 doesn't offer a lot to do, because it's not a big scripted follow path to end goal. It's make your own fun and drive cars at your own will. In my personal opinion, I think what Forza Horizon 5 offers is incredible. Being able to go and cruise around the map in your favorite car with your friends, jumping into proper sanctioned races against people online, being able to go and do drifting events, or jumping through danger signs, hitting up rivals leaderboards, things like that. And most importantly, the event lab. I started talking about the event lab back in Forza Horizon 4 before it was even announced. I said that if the developers gave us a custom race feature, it would be the biggest and the best feature we've ever had. And when they introduced it for FH5, I said that it would be the biggest and the best feature they would ever add. And 3 years later, I stand by that. It is, without a doubt, the best thing they've ever had. The sheer amount of creativity shown off by certain members of the community time and time again is truly mind-blowing. Being transported from Mexico and sometimes into other countries, other regions, and sometimes into other planets and worlds, it is unbelievable what the event lab is able to do, and the options and the creativity that you can have in there is mind-blowing, and it is without a doubt my favorite part of FH5. But here's the thing, it's not all good for Forza Horizon 5, because as always, with the good comes the not so good, and I think we need to talk about some of that. Number one, the festival playlist. Although I personally am a big fan of the festival playlist, they've been a thing for 6 years now, if you go back to Forza Horizon 4, and over that time frame, they haven't really changed all that much. Sure, when they came out, they were fresh, they were exciting, they were new, and they were unique. But over those past 6 years, they haven't really changed or evolved that much. I know the developers have introduced treasure hunts and the riddles and the rival stuff, and that's cool, but they still feel super similar to the way they did back in Forza Horizon 4, for example. Honestly, my hope for the festival playlist as we go into the future and potentially into the new game, I hope the developers push the envelope. I know they may not necessarily want to, because it is without a doubt the developers' best tool of having people come back to the game week in and week out, keep logging in, unlocking new cars, introducing new content into the game, and stuff like that. It is a fantastic tool, and it works really, really well, but for some of the players who have been doing them since day one, they're getting a little bit on the old side. At least we'd like some new stuff. I feel like we should also talk about multiplayer in this. Now, let's just ignore the server issues. Server issues are just kind of, well, they're just kind of a feature in video games in 2025, let's be honest. And I mean, after 2021, the servers for FH5 were actually pretty good. One of my biggest gripes about Forza Horizon 5 is there aren't any real competitive features in the game. Forza Horizon 4 had a great thing with the whole ranked racing thing and the whole Grandmaster drifting thing, and Forza Horizon 5 went, we don't need to be competitive, this is a fun game, you just race for fun. I understand it's 2025 and everybody needs a participation medal, but it's racing. At the end of the day, somebody stands on the top of the podium and goes, ha, I'm faster than you. That's kind of the way racing works, and I kind of wish it was more of a thing in FH5, and the removal of ranked racing and ranked drifting, if you ask me, was a big F. Not to mention, actually, kind of on the same groove as that, the leaderboards are still filled with so many cheaters, and I understand it might be a lot of work to remove them all and this and that and whatever. I get it, but it's been 4 years almost. This game has been out, and nothing's changed. Now, we've finished up with the good. We've finished up with the not so good. I think we need to talk about the bad and the really, really bad. And if you ask me, there is only one thing that belongs in this category. The map. Now, here's the thing about the map for Forza Horizon 5. On paper, Mexico is without a doubt the biggest map the developers have ever made. It's also the most diverse map they've ever made. But it's only when you go in and you actually start driving around in it, you realize how odd it feels. I've tried to simplify this as much as I could. I've broken it down into 3 major issues I think I have with the map. Now, real quick, before I jump into that, I don't actually think it's an issue with Mexico. I think it's an issue with the way Mexico was implemented into this game. Mexico in real life is straight up a beautiful country with unbelievable both driving roads, off-roading areas, incredible cities, and everything in between. Issue number 1 I have with the map. I don't actually know what this is called. A developer will need to let me know. But I'm going to call them hero areas. You know the areas all around the map where players kind of naturally congregate around? Usually they're areas like a parking garage, for example, or a special Horizon festival, or like an airport drag strip. Areas like that, you know, where players kind of hang out, naturally. They're fun places for us to go. I actually went in, Forza Horizon 5, counted them all up. I counted up 10 key areas around the map, split between the festival, the airport, the off-road racetrack, the stadium, Guanajuato, Playa Azul, so on and so forth. Those sort of areas. There were about 10 of them across Mexico. Keep in mind, that's over the biggest map the developers have ever created. But then I went back to Forza Horizon 4, and I counted up all of the unique places, and I counted 12 over there, split between things again, like the airport, the quarry, the castle, the train yards, the icy frozen lake, Mortimer Gardens, and so on. And again, keep in mind, that's a...
¡Ojo a esta última noticia! La NASA aumenta a 3,1% el riesgo de impacto del asteroide 2024 R4 contra la Tierra. Un punto más de probabilidad en solo una semana. Y subiendo. Como pueden ver en esta tabla, la tendencia es hacia arriba, alcanzando el máximo histórico. Nunca antes en la historia un asteroide había tenido tan alta probabilidad de impactar la Tierra, 3,1%, colocándose el riesgo en un nivel 3 en la escala de Turín. ¿Es esto cierto? Y si es así, ¿qué está pasando? ¿Qué podría ocurrir? ¿Y cómo evitarlo? Hoy vengo con una actualización del vídeo del otro día, con nuevos datos y mucho más, porque he tenido la suerte de contar con un experto que va a responder a todas tus dudas, todas tus preguntas, las que me has ido haciendo y yo las he ido anotando y se las he hecho a él.
But I'm getting a little ahead.
Einstein once wrote an introduction to a book on astronomy. He mentioned this idea. He called it an idea of pure genius.
This is Terence Tao, one of the world's most renowned mathematicians. What he's referencing right now is how Kepler deduced the shape of Earth's orbit, which was astoundingly more clever than I had realized, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself. A lot of math enthusiasts will be familiar with Tao as a story of prodigy turned prodigious mathematician, but one of the most remarkable features of his career is how collaborative it's been, spanning an unusually wide breadth of topics within math. I had the chance to sit down with him, and I asked if there were any topics that he believed would benefit from some strongly visual presentation, and I fully expected an answer from pure math, but I was pleasantly surprised when he proposed instead a story of cosmic distances. It's the story of how humanity first figured out the sizes of objects from the size of the Earth to that of the solar system on up to the universe, and how each measurement unlocks a path to the next one.
I always liked astronomy as a child. Just found like red dwarfs and neutron stars and so forth fascinating. You know. Yeah. Then I had a little telescope. As a kid, I just read all these books and said, you know, the distance to Mars is 18 million miles or whatever, and I just sort of accepted, oh, they figured out some way to do this. I never knew how they did it.
Science communication at its best is, to me, less about presenting facts in a memorable way, and more about showing how it is that we know what we know. When it comes to cosmic distances, it's very easy to be awestruck by the sheer unfathomable scales involved. But what deserves just as much awe, and is much less commonly highlighted in pop science documentaries, is how clever the reasoning can be at each step.
And I realized, oh, there was always some mathematical trick. And it was always a cool trick. Like if you want to measure the distance to x, you can never just look at x. You have to look at y and how x impacts y. So the idea is clever, and then you have to have data, which needs technology and so forth. But then it's just mathematics.
In this video, we'll cover the steps of the ladder up to the planets, that moment of sheer genius that Kepler brought. And in the next part, we'll continue on up to the most distant galaxies. The very first measurement of the ladder is the radius of the Earth, a somewhat classic tale. But to even ask this question presumes that the Earth is a sphere, or at least roughly spherical, so you might wonder how the ancients first deduced the shape of the Earth.
The first really convincing proof came from the Moon. And this is the constant theme in the distance ladder. If you want to measure one object, in this case the Earth, you have to use a reference object that is some distance away. See, the thing is that we're stuck on the Earth. Like if we could step away, if you look from many different angles, you could see that it's round. If you only saw it from one angle, it could be a flat disk. Flat disk, if you look at it from a different angle, it would look like an ellipse. But you can actually prove this nice little geometric argument actually that if there's a convex body and every single projection is a circle, then it has to be a sphere.
I'm going to guess that most of you find this pretty intuitive. After all, if every shadow of a given shape is a circle, what could that shape be other than a sphere? But of course, a mathematician always keeps a keen eye out for those strange counterintuitive exceptions, and he shared with me a nice proof of this fact after the interview, which I'll link to in the description.
In 2 dimensions, what I just said is not true. So there are 2-dimensional shapes which every projection is an interval of the same length, but they're not round. Okay. But in 3D, there's enough perspective, as it turns out. If you could look at the Earth and you could always see that it was round, that tells you that this is a sphere. NASA can do this, okay, but Aristotle could do this, and he used the Moon because he knew about lunar eclipses. Lunar eclipses happen when the Moon falls onto the Earth's shadow, and the Earth's shadow, as you can just visibly see, it's always a circular arc. So that's the picture I can show you. This is not my photo, but someone took several images of the Moon entering and exiting the lunar eclipse and composited it together into a single shot. You can see the shadow of the Earth. This is visible proof that the Earth is round. And you don't need telescopes, sextants, spacecraft. You just need to look at the Moon.
Something else very cool revealed by these kinds of compositions is how you can just see the relative size of the Earth and the Moon. We'll get to that in a moment, but first things first, how do we figure out how big the Earth is?
The first person to do this that we know of is Eratosthenes. The way the story goes is that he had read somewhere of this well in this town called Syene, where on one day of the year, the summer solstice, you could look down in the well and you could see the sun reflected in the water underneath. And he said, oh, that's kind of cool. I don't live there, but I have a well in my own town, Alexandria. I'm going to go try the same thing. So he waited until the summer solstice. At noon, he went down and looked at the well, and there was no reflection of the sun. So I think, like, if you're a regular person at this point would say, oh, that story is fake news or whatever the film was at the time. Sure. And he knew from Aristotle and the others the Earth was round. The reason what was happening was that the sun was not actually vertical.
Let's think of the sun as far enough away from Earth that all of its rays of light are effectively parallel. At any given moment, if you draw a line from the center of the Earth straight to the sun, it passes through some point on the surface, which must be experiencing this phenomenon, where the sun is directly overhead. But if you were someone in Eratosthenes' time, it would be very difficult to know exactly where this was happening at a given moment. So what makes the summer solstice special is that on that day, the axis of Earth's rotation is tilted directly towards the sun. And as a result, on this day, as the Earth revolves around that axis over 24 hours, there's a consistent line of latitude where all of the locations on this line predictably experience this phenomenon, where at high noon, it's the highest of all high noons, where the sun is overhead. This line has a special name, it's called the Tropic of Cancer, and the town Syene that Eratosthenes had read about sits on this line. Now Eratosthenes himself was a bit further north than that, in Alexandria. So on that day, at exactly noon, the direction he perceives as straight up, which I'll draw with the pink line here, is not pointed towards the sun. It sits at some angle with all of those rays.
He had what's called a gnomon, which is kind of like an ancient protractor or sundial, portable sundial, actually, basically. He measured that the sun was actually about 7 degrees off of the vertical.
Critically, because he could also know that at this exact moment, down in Syene, many, many, many miles away, the sun was directly overhead, he deduced that this means the arc length along Earth between Alexandria and Syene is about 7 degrees. This in turn means the ratio between 7 degrees and the full 360 degrees of a circle must be the same as the ratio of the distance between those two towns and the full circumference of the Earth. Now keep in mind, in the records that we have, it's not like he's reporting this distance in miles or kilometers. The units they were using back then were stadia, where a single unit is something like the length of a stadium.
Well, the distance was about, it's 5,000 stadia, which is about 500 miles.
How accurate is our conversion between stadia and...
That's a good question. We are not completely certain. So with the conventionally accepted conversions, I think the accuracy of Eratosthenes' estimate is about 20%.
You can find sources online that claim his estimate was more accurate than this, but just keep in mind if you selectively choose which of the many possible conversions between stadia and miles to use, you can kind of p-hack your way into a better number here. Still, 10% is pretty good with no technology, but of course all of this hinges on actually knowing the distance between these two towns. So the natural question you might ask is, how would he know that?
This is not recorded. There are some theories. One is that there are merchants that go up and down the Monaro, and they know that in a certain day that their sailboat travels so and so many stadia, and it takes them so and so many days as to why. And so from that, they have some estimate. The joke is that he basically hired what we would now call a graduate student to pace the distance from a graduate student. That 5,000 stadia is the only direct measurement. Just from that one graduate student, you can actually get all the way to measure the diameter of the universe. Right, that's not actually what we do nowadays. I mean, because the errors stack up, but in principle, you could do that.
If you have a sense for how big the Earth is, one of the first cosmological distances that you can deduce from this value is the distance between the Earth and the Moon.
You can use eclipses again. So shadows are what let you observe things from a different location. You have a lunar eclipse. So the sun is over here. The Earth shadow has basically twice the radius of the Earth. It's a little trickier than that. There's something called the penumbra and the umbra, okay? But as a close approximation. Lunar eclipses, they last no longer than 4 hours. And this they knew from many, many observations. The moon actually takes one lunar month to traverse its orbit. And so, again, by taking the ratio between 28 days and 4 hours, you can work out the relation between the distance to the moon and the radius of the Earth.
To be slightly more accurate, during the full eclipse between first and last contact, the distance that the moon passes through would not only be those 2 Earth radii, but it would also include 2 moon radii. So if you want to measure how long it takes for the moon to traverse 1 Earth diameter in space, it might be more like the time between the first moment the moon hits the shadow and the first moment that it starts to exit it. Another thing to keep in mind, if you were to go out and try this yourself on the next lunar eclipse, is that lunar eclipses don't necessarily go through the center of Earth's shadow like this. So the measurements that the Greeks would have had to use would be with respect to the longest known eclipses. In either case, the slightly more accurate number to put in here would be more like 3.5 hours. And then when you work it out, this ratio between the length of a lunar month and the length of a lunar eclipse, all divided by pi, would tell you how many Earth radii away the moon is.
Aristarchus did this. It measured that the distance to the moon is about 50 Earth radii. And actually, the orbit varies between like 58 and 62 or something. So actually, it's really good.
As good as you could hope.
Yeah.
I brought up earlier how with these lunar eclipses, you can see the relative size of the moon and the Earth. The moon is about a quarter as wide as the Earth is. Now in practice, it's difficult to make this a precise measurement without photography. So the Greeks had a different way that they could deduce the size of the moon. Next time you see a full moon rising, try to measure how long it takes. What you should find is that it's around 2 minutes. What you're watching is not so much the moon moving through the orbit. Instead, it's that as you and the Earth are rotating, your line of sight over the horizon is scanning over the moon.
The moon basically takes 24 hours to cycle around the Earth, at least as observed by us because of the Earth's rotation. Actually, slightly less because the moon's also moving, but basically 24 hours. And so therefore, you can work out the ratio between the radius of the moon and the distance to the moon, just by taking the ratio between 2 minutes and 24 hours.
So because they knew the distance to the moon, they could use this to figure out the radius. Now keep in mind, both of their estimates could be at best approximately true. Since the real orbit of the moon is an ellipse, it's not a perfect circle. But the point is that with almost no technology, they had pretty decent estimates for the size of the moon and how far away it was.
The sun was trickier. So at the time, they thought the sun went around the Earth. But it actually doesn't matter for the argument whether the sun goes around the Earth or the Earth goes around the sun. Again, there's the two numbers. There's the size of the sun and the distance to the sun. You can compute the ratio again because of eclipses. And this is a weird coincidence. I mean, there's no reason why it should be true. But when there's a solar eclipse, the moon and the sun are almost exactly the same size. Like it's not triple lunar eclipse, it's lunar solar. Earth shadow is much bigger. But for some reason, they are almost the same size.
What this means is that if you look at the ratio between the radius of the moon and the distance that it is away from the Earth, which is what determines how big it looks to us up in the sky, because of this solar eclipse coincidence, that has to be the same as the ratio between the radius of the sun and its distance away from the Earth. As we saw, the Greeks already knew that ratio for the moon. The point is that they could get at least an approximate sense for the size of the sun if they could figure out how far away it is, or vice versa. Now, the animation I'm showing right now is very grossly not to scale. You and I both know that the sun is actually much, much farther away than the moon is. But of course, that's not obvious when you just look at it in the sky. And so you might wonder, how could you conclude that it has to be so far away? In ancient times, for all people knew, seeing that it was roughly the same size as the moon in the sky, it could be, say, twice as far away as the moon is and only twice as big. In fact, for the animation, I'm going to go ahead and leave it unrealistically close like this, because it helps clarify how the next logical step works.
How do you work out the distance to the sun? You again use the moon. It's almost the only available object you can use. But you do something else. You look at phases of the moon. The sun illuminates half of the moon. And so we on Earth, we also see half the moon, but it's a different half. And so because of that, we get phases. This is also why we know the moon is round. If the moon was flat, then we don't get phases. We get either a dim moon or a lit moon, we wouldn't get these phases. So sometimes you get a full moon, the moon is over here, you see the whole thing. Sometimes you get a new moon over here, and sometimes you get a half moon.
You can pretty much rediscover for yourself a way to estimate the distance to the sun by asking when exactly a half moon occurs. From the name, you would guess that it's halfway between a new moon and a full moon, but that's actually not true.
Half moon occurs not when the moon and the sun make a right angle at the Earth, but actually when the Earth and the sun make a right angle at the moon. Hopefully your graph would be better than drawing it.
Hopefully this makes some sense. For us to see a half moon, it means that the side of the moon that we see facing us overlaps by exactly 90 degrees with the side of the moon being illuminated by the sun, which in turn means we have a right angle at the spot labeled here.
As your lovely illustration will show, half moons are slightly closer to new moons than new moons.
Of course, in this graphic, the effect is very exaggerated because the sun is being drawn so close to the Earth. How far away the sun is determines when exactly that half moon occurs. The farther away, the closer it is to the true halfway point. In fact, you can make this a little more quantitative, where if you measure the angle separating that halfway point between new moons and full moons from the point of a half moon, which is confusingly not the same thing, then intuitively you can see how a smaller angle means a larger distance to the sun. And more precisely, when you do the little bit of trigonometry here, you can conclude that the distance to the sun is the same as the distance to the moon divided by the sine of that angle.
This is where the Greeks started hitting a wall of technology. What they did is that they knew that the moon took 28 days to go around the Earth, and so they had to measure exactly when a half moon occurred and what the deviation is. Now, Aristarchus, he thought that the distance was 6 hours. Half moons occurred 6 hours before the midpoint between the moon and full moon. He doesn't write how he came up with this. And it's wrong. The actual discrepancy is half an hour. He's off by a huge factor. So the thing is, well, A, we have clocks, which work in the dark. They had sundials and which don't work in the dark. They also did not have telescopes. Mathematically, the method was sound. Technologically, it was just not possible for this method to work. No, but it worked well enough. Okay, so he was off by basically a whole order of magnitude. He thought that the sun was 20 times further away than the moon.
The true answer, based on the slight change to that angle that he was trying to measure, is more like 370 times the distance to the moon.
And he thought that the sun was 7 times bigger than the Earth, when in fact it is 109 times bigger. Even with that lousy measurement, Aristarchus was the first to make a really important conclusion, which is that the sun did not revolve around the Earth. The sun was 7 times, well, he thought the sun was 7 times larger. Why would the sun go around the Earth? So the Earth should go around the sun. Qualitatively, his conclusion was correct. It's just that the sun is much, much larger than he thought. But he was the first. And like, it's not obvious, you look at the sun, it's this big, right? Really? Okay, but it's actually 100 times bigger than the Earth. So he was the first to propose the heliocentric model, actually. If you look at Copernicus's famous book, he says, Aristarchus proposed the heliocentric model. And the other Greeks dismissed him for good mathematical reasons, but again, they were limited by the technology. They said that it doesn't make sense for the Earth to go around the sun, because if the Earth would go around the sun, the position of the shape of the constellations would shift as you go from one side of the sun to the other, and we don't see that.
This is an important point to emphasize because it's going to come up again for us later when we figure out the size of the galaxy. So if you've got a bunch of stars sitting here in three-dimensional space, and you picture yourself as an observer staring at those stars, and you move around through that three-dimensional space, then the apparent relative position of those stars shifts around as you move. We call this parallax. It's the same phenomenon where if you're on a car in the highway and you look out, all of the nearby trees seem to be moving much more quickly than the background mountains. So when Aristarchus says, hey guys, maybe the Earth is going around the sun, all of his fellow Greeks are like, well, if that was true, and you've got this Earth-Sun system sitting among a bunch of stars, then for us, the observers sitting here on the planet Earth, as we move around through space, from winter to spring to summer, and it's going to be quite a bit of movement through space since evidently the sun is supposed to be quite far away from the Earth, then because of this parallax, we should see a change in the pattern of the stars. The nearby stars should be moving a little bit more than the background stars, and the overall shape of the constellations should slowly drift through the seasons. But that's not what we see. The constellations seem to be the same shape between the summer and the winter.
And that would only be possible if the stars were much, much, much further away than we currently think they are. So Aristarchus, if you were to accept your model, we must make the universe thousands and thousands of times bigger, therefore we're going to dismiss your theory. It shows you that even when you have the math right, you don't necessarily get to the truth. Because of course the universe is in fact not just thousands of times larger than the theory, but actually billions and trillions of times larger. This is not an obvious fact.
At this point, let's jump ahead quite a bit in history up to Kepler. Perhaps the best part of this whole story.
This is the most genius step of the ladder. The first time you climb from one step to the next, it's always heroic. Because the first time, you're at the edge of what the data and the math and the technology can give you.
Now, Kepler was not working from a blank slate. He was building off of the work of others, most notably that of Copernicus.
So Copernicus had already worked out that the planets move around the sun. He said that the planets move around the sun in circular orbits. And he even figured out the period, how long it takes for each planet to go around the sun.
So, for example, we know that the Earth takes exactly 1 year to do a full orbit, and Copernicus had figured out that Mars takes 687 days for its orbit, and likewise for all the other known planets. He gets all the fame because of heliocentrism, but these numbers were arguably his most important contribution. You'll see in a moment why they are critical.
The way he computed this was that he had all this Babylonian data.
Essentially, the way this worked was by compiling centuries of observations for where the planets appear among the stars, then figuring out when those patterns repeat, and then, very importantly, factoring in the movement of Earth in that time. Kepler was interested in figuring out the relative sizes of all of these orbits. He had this funny little pet theory that was linked to the 5 Platonic solids. The idea was if you imagine a sphere inscribed in an octahedron, and then you fit the smallest possible sphere around that, and then fit the smallest possible icosahedron around that, then layer on another sphere, and then a dodecahedron, one more sphere, then a tetrahedron, one more sphere, a cube, and then one final sphere, you get these 6 spheres, and the ratios between the sizes of those spheres, Kepler believed, would match the ratios of the orbits for the 6 known planets. Since these are the Platonic solids, it somehow feels like a very natural or universal set of ratios.
It would have been a beautiful theory if this was true.
So, hungry to prove his very beautiful theory, he needed to look at the historical data for where all the planets appeared in the sky.
There was this astronomer at the time, Tycho Brahe, who was this very wealthy, eccentric aristocrat who had an interest in astronomy. And so he convinced the governor of Denmark to give him an island complete with peasants to build him an astronomy school, Uranienburg. And he just made decades and decades of observations of all kinds of things, including all the planets. Kepler wanted his data, but Tycho Brahe wouldn't give it to him. He stole the data. Actually, they weren't on the best of terms. Anyway, he took all his data and he wanted to use it to confirm his theory. And it was off by a couple %. Like, he could not make the theory fit. And in fact, not only could he not make his own theory fit, he couldn't even make Copernicus' theory fit. He could not make circular orbits match.
It's really important to understand that once you throw out the assumption that orbits are circular, it is very difficult to make sense out of the observational data. It's not like what Tycho Brahe was recording is the exact position in 3D space for all the planets over time. They didn't know the distances to the planets. The only thing that you can see is where in the sky a given planet appears, what constellation it's inside on a given date. From that information alone, just a sequence of angles in the sky basically, Kepler managed to deduce the shapes of all of these planets' orbits, including the shape of Earth's orbit.
The sun is fixed. Okay, Earth is moving around in some orbit, not quite circular, and Mars is also moving around by some orbit, not quite circular. Okay, and we don't know what the orbit is. About the only thing we can do is at any given time on Earth, you can work out where you are with the sun, and you can work out this direction. But you have no notion of distance, you only have direction.
Imagine that you had observed Mars night after night. Each night you can see where Mars is with respect to the constellations, and this tells you basically the direction from Earth to Mars with respect to the celestial sphere. But you don't know exactly where Earth is, and you also don't know how far away Mars is. You do know the direction to the sun. Even if you can't literally see it in the constellations, you know this because of what date of the year it is, since that tells you how far the Earth has gone around. Keep in mind, although Aristarchus had his estimate for how far away the sun was, people still didn't really have a precise measure for that distance. Aristarchus's method is just too error-prone for anything exact. So all you really know are these two different angles, and you want to figure out these two unknown orbits.
That doesn't seem like enough information. Even if you assume everything's on a plane, which you more or less can, all the planets live on the zodiac, so it's pretty much a planar diagram. Well, this looks unsolvable. In math, if you can't solve a problem, you first try to solve a simpler problem. So let's solve a simpler problem. Suppose Mars doesn't move. Suppose Mars is actually nailed to space. Okay. Then you can at least work out the orbit of the Earth.
If Mars was fixed in space like this, then these two directions are at least enough to tell you where the Earth is, at least with respect to that fixed location for Mars and the fixed location for the Sun. You would essentially draw these two lines and find the intersection. So if you have the data for many different nights in this idealized hypothetical, you could plot where the Earth is on each night and so see how it moves around the Sun, at least with respect to these two fixed locations for Mars and the Sun. You still don't know absolute distances.
So if you had two fixed landmarks, Sun and Mars, then you can work out the orbit of the Earth. But Mars does, of course, moves. So how do you triangulate when something moves? So this is the genius thing. Kepler knew because of Copernicus that every 729 days, Mars comes back to where it was before. So if he takes Tycho's data, but takes a time series spaced at spacings of 729 days, then in that time series, Mars is a reference point. Brahe observed for 10 years Mars. There was just enough data in this data set.
It is perhaps worth being extra clear about how exactly this works. Like we said, on a given night, using these two different directions, you can figure out Earth's location with respect to where Mars happens to be. So if you wait 687 days and Mars is back in that same location, you get another data point for Earth with respect to that same spot. Using 10 years worth of data, this gives you 5 different locations for where Earth is. But again, this depends on exactly where in space Mars is. If you jiggle it about, it jiggles around the implied 5 points for Earth. I'll go ahead and give those a slightly different color, and then have you imagine looking just a couple days later to a different location of Mars, and then taking a similar time series, again spaced out by this Martian year, to get 5 more positions for Earth, but now they're dependent on that different location for Mars. Of course, you don't know exactly how Mars moves, so you don't know exactly where these 5 points are, but if it's just a day later, Mars only will have moved a little bit, and you know those 5 points should only have moved a little bit. So what Kepler has is essentially like this massive jigsaw puzzle, where each piece looks like 5 points for where Earth is, conditioned on a mystery location for Mars. Knowing that all of those pieces have to fit together about a day apart, he was able to piece them all together to get a coherent orbit for Earth, with respect to a certain coherent orbit for Mars. To be clear, nothing about this tells you absolute distances, it's just giving you the shape of the orbit, but even still, he was able to see what no one before him had ever seen, which is that this orbit is not a circle, it's an ellipse. And he was even able to find other neat facts, like how the area that Earth sweeps out as it goes around this orbit is the same for a given time period, no matter where on the ellipse it sits. And once you have a sense for the shape of Earth's orbit, it makes it a lot easier to deduce the orbit of Mars or any other planet.
I think this will reverse. If you take one fixed point of Mars, you can take measurements from Earth, and you can now work out the location of Mars.
This angle measurement may not tell you the distance to Mars on one night, but if you take 5 separate nights spaced out by 687 days, and you know that Mars is at the same point in space on those 5 different days, then you get these 5 different angles that are more than enough to help you triangulate where Mars is, at least with respect to Earth's orbit. When you do this for many different adjacent time series, you can draw out the exact orbit of Mars over the course of those 687 days.
Einstein once wrote an introduction to the book of astronomy, and I think he mentioned this idea, he called it an idea of pure genius. He needed the data, he needed, not just Tycho's data, but Copernicus' data, which came all the way from the Babylonians. So the period of Mars, that was obtained over centuries. But he could put it all together with what we would now call data analysis.
Again, you still don't know the absolute distances. This gives you the shapes of both orbits, and doing something similar, you can get the shapes of all the other planets' orbits relative to Earth's. But to Kepler and his contemporaries, the exact scale of the solar system remained a mystery. It's like they could draw the exact picture, but they didn't know the size of the paper. So from this point on, astronomers were on a hunt to figure out a way to measure any distance they could in the solar system. Because if they could do it precisely, just one distance would be enough to lock everything else into place. In the next part, we'll continue with the interview, and you'll see how this was first done, and how once you finally have an accurate measure for the distance between the Earth and the Sun, you can use it to deduce the speed of light, the distance to the nearest stars, and ultimately the distance to the farthest observable galaxies. If you want to stay updated for the next part, make sure to follow 3 Blue and Brown on whatever platform it is that you most like to follow stuff on. There's an email list.
This is a tiny piece of metal just 3 millimeters across. And here's what happens if you just keep zooming in. 1,000 times, 100,000 times, 50 million times. Each of these blobs is an actual atom. I saw this the other day at the University of Sydney, and it kind of blew my mind, because up until just 30 years ago, directly seeing atoms like this was thought to be impossible.
The rooms that you're going to see here are perhaps the most shielded rooms on campus, or even in the whole of Sydney, I would say, and perhaps also the most expensive.
That's wild.
So why is it so hard to see atoms?
Well, you can't actually see atoms with visible light. That's because while light has wavelengths between 380 and 750 nanometers, an atom is still over 3,000 times smaller, just 0.1 nanometers. And if the wavelength of light is much bigger than the thing you're trying to see, the light will just diffract or bend around it, so you won't be able to see it.
So if you want to see atoms, you need something with a much, much smaller wavelength. The best candidate isn't even light. It's electrons. In 1924, a French physicist named Louis de Broglie worked out that everything was sort of wave-like. Not just light, but matter too. Atoms, molecules, even you yourself have a wavelength.
And the formula for this wavelength is Planck's constant divided by the object's momentum, that is, mass times velocity.
So here what you actually see, that's the column of the microscope where we accelerate the 300 keV electrons down.
300 kilovolts, these electrons.
Yes. So they are relativistic particles.
How fast are they moving? 99% the speed of light, or?
Well, around 80.
80% the speed of light?
Yeah.
So what would be their wavelength?
The wavelength is the Planck constant over the momentum, right? So if we calculate that, we come to around between 2 to 3 picometers.
Whoa!
Yeah.
That's over 100,000 times smaller than visible light, so theoretically, you get 100,000 times more resolution. Shortly after de Broglie's discovery, a group of scientists in Germany started working on a microscope that would use these high-speed electrons.
The only problem is you can't bend electrons using glass lenses. So how do you focus them?
Hans Busch, a German physicist, suggested that an electromagnetic lens might do the trick. He published his results in 1926, but never actually built one. Fortunately, a copy of his paper fell into the hands of an eager young PhD student, Ernst Ruska. Ruska built his first prototype by coiling up some wire and surrounding it with iron, taking care to leave a gap in the middle. Then, when he passed a current through the coil, it induced a donut-shaped magnetic field through the metal and across this gap. This was his lens. To test it, Ruska first boiled electrons off a tungsten filament, the same kind of filament you find in an incandescent light bulb. he accelerated these free electrons through a positively charged anode down to his electromagnetic lens. As an electron approaches the lens, the magnetic field exerts a force on it. So if an electron is traveling in the y direction and the magnetic fields are in the x direction, this force, called the Lorentz force, pushes it in the z direction. But as the electron moves this way, it encounters other magnetic field lines along the donut shape, which constantly point its motion in a circle. But then this circular motion means the Lorentz force starts pushing the electron inwards as well, spiraling it into the center of the lens. Now, if you trace the path of the whole beam of electrons, you'll see they all get steered into the center, focusing the beam. By 1931, Ruska and his colleague Max Knoll used this kind of design to build the first working electron microscope. It was pretty basic, made of brass roughly bolted together. But it worked. The image itself was created once the focused electron beam hit a sample sitting at the focal point. The sample needed to be incredibly thin, only around 100 nanometers thick. More electrons would make it through the thinner parts of the sample than the thicker parts, creating an electron imprint of the sample. Then a second electromagnetic lens magnified this imprint down onto a fluorescent detector, producing the final image. This was known as a transmission electron microscope, or TEM. Now, early versions of the microscope barely magnified at all. In fact, it wasn't even better than an optical microscope. But Ruska was determined. Over the next few years, he experimented with adding more lenses onto the microscope to create bigger and bigger images. By the mid-1930s, Ruska had gotten the TEM way past 10,000 times magnification. It could produce close-ups of insects, bacteria, and even viruses at a level far surpassing the optical microscope. But right as Ruska's TEM was taking off, a German physicist named Otto Scherzer published a paper claiming that the microscope was about to hit a brick wall. There was a flaw in the electromagnetic lens, he wrote, that was completely unavoidable. For an electron to make it to the focus of the lens, it needs to be deflected by a specific amount. If you simplify its trajectory, you can define that ideal deflection with this angle theta. This angle depends on the horizontal distance of the electron from the optical axis, and how far down the axis the focus is, also known as the focal length. The shorter the focal length, the stronger the magnification. If you graph this angle as a function of distance to the optical axis, you'll see that it can be approximated as linear. The problem is that the magnetic field doesn't scale linearly. It's much stronger near the edges of the magnet. So if you plot the curve for the actual deflection of the electrons, you'll see that the magnetic field over-deflects the electrons further out. Their angles are bigger than they should be, so they end up focusing before the rays in the middle. And as a result, the focus is spread across the optical axis instead of being contained in a single point. The blur starts out around the edges of the image, but it gets worse the higher the magnification. This is called spherical aberration, and it distorts every radially symmetric magnetic lens. In fact, it doesn't just affect magnetic lenses. Every spherical lens, from a camera to a telescope to a magnifying glass, also suffers from it. But there is a surprisingly simple way to minimize spherical aberration. Just add a second lens, one that diverges light instead of converging it. Now, a diverging lens also suffers from spherical aberration, but if it has the same amount of aberration as your converging lens, just in reverse, you can stack the two to essentially cancel out their effects, and that removes the aberrations almost entirely. Almost all modern lens systems in cameras and microscopes use some sort of correcting divergent lens. So you might imagine that the TEM simply needs its own version of a diverging spherical lens to magnify further. But with magnets, this is physically impossible. Every magnet has two poles, a north and a south. It's impossible to just have one. Even if you split a magnet down the middle, it creates two smaller magnets, both to the north and the south. And all magnetic field lines have to start at one pole and end at the other, forming a closed loop.
Is a direct result of the second Maxwell equation, because the field that you do create has field lines that start and end at the same magnet. So the electrons will always cross through two lines. The first time it passes through by the Lorentz force, it's brought into the spiraling motion, and then the second time, from that spiraling motion, which has then a slightly different direction, it's pushed towards the axis. That's why all electromagnetic lenses, by default, will converge the beam and never diverge it.
Even if you shot electrons in from the other side of the lens, they would still get focused. This is what Otto Scherzer's paper proved in 1936, stopping progress on the TEM. It is impossible to produce a radially symmetric magnetic lens that diverges.
And this was, of course, a big roadblock for the development of electron microscopy, because people saw, okay, we can accelerate electrons as much as we want. The presence of the spherical aberration will always be in the way.